Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Fake Nerds Watch for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. I am Brandon T. McClure. With me on this trek today is Ryan Eliopoulos.
Hello, I'm here. I'm here until tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
Sparkz Witty.
Yes, I am also present and ready.
And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I've never pronounced your last name in your presence. So I'm here as well with friend of the show and good friend of ours, Xander Jaque.
Perfect.
Great.
Perfect. Really well done.
Great.
Nailed
I'm
it.
happy about that.
Good in one.
Xander, you're a Star Trek fan.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell audiences a bit about yourself, considering this is the first time many of them will have seen you?
Oh, right. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What up? I'm Xander, aka Jack in the Box, streamer, photographer, longtime Star Trek fan. My mom, right? Yeah, my mom.
I don't know where you're going.
No.
I got thrown because when you said long time, you said lion, and I was like, is it going to say lion tamer?
No,
I was ready to yes and then you said my mom.
Mom's a lion.
Oh man, no, okay. My mom's been a Trekkie literally forever. So I got into Star Trek through her, mostly through The Next Generation, which I think a lot of people's entry was that.
True.
Yeah.
And just kind of like stayed on the periphery of some shows and then really delved into others, but still within the Star Trek media universe pretty much my entire life.
Very cool. Well, happy to have you. I need someone who speaks the language this week. So I'm really happy you're here.
I thought he meant Spanish.
I kind of want you to throw Spanish at him.
No.
Oh boy. You want to throw a little French at me? I maybe could stumble through that, but no.
He means Star Trek.
He means Star Trek. The language.
We don't watch. I'm more versed than him, but certainly not.
Right.
I'm not. I would not consider myself a Trekkie.
I'm such a baby. I'm the little baby.
Before we get started we are talking about episode 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, season 2, today, tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. We'll get into that in a moment. I do want a couple of shout outs. Throw out a couple of shout outs real quickly. One is to former co-host of this show, Cookie from Just a Little Podcast. Congratulations on your child. She has come, and he sent me the pictures. I'm very happy for him.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, just congratulations, Cookie.
Yeah, congrats to Cookie.
Congrats.
And on conversation, you may have remembered a friend of mine, Andy Palastes. I haven't said that name out loud in quite a while. On Conversation Season 1, I talked to this gentleman. He's become friends since, and he told me on Conversation Season 1 that he was doing this, and he wrote a book. And that book is now out. It is called We Have Engaged the Borg, The Oral History of the Battle of Wolf 359. You all are familiar with how the book World War Z is written, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's that, but that's for Star Trek. Right. So it is the Battle of Wolf 359 is a seminal battle in Star Trek The Next Generation. It is the battle that is depicted in the Best of Both Worlds two-parter, where Patrick Stewart becomes Locutus Borg. Andy has written a book of interviews and things like that, like an in-universe book about the Battle of Wolf 359. I've read a little bit of it. It's incredible. There's a lot of great character work in there. It's all interviews from characters within the franchise, some new characters that he's invented. He snuck in, I didn't know this, he snuck in a cameo by me.
Nice.
In the book, and I was very excited about that. So I'm in the book.
You're canon.
And I'm like, that's awesome. But this is fan fiction, is not officially licensed by CBS. It is a free book for you to download the PDF for. The link will be in the description below for anybody who is interested. I highly recommend. It's great.
Very cool.
Okay,
Nice,
so
nice,
that's what did you say, Sparkz?
I said nice.
Very cool. So, nice. Well, that's 3 nices, so that'll transition very nicely into our 3-word title: tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
I was gonna make the same joke, but differently.
This episode is directed by Amanda Rowe, who directed last season's Elysium Kingdom, and written by David Reed, who's written episodes of The Boys season 3 and The Boys season 4. That's kind of cool. Okay, so what did we think about this one? Ryan, you want to go first?
Absolutely. I thought this was another terrific episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Followed a character I really like, Noonien Singh. She's really cool. What's her whole history about? Can't wait to find out more. Oh, do we? Love it. I think it's much like last week's episode. We got a more focused view on a character that I didn't particularly... not that they're bad, as I wasn't vibing with super hard with Kirk in season 1. It wasn't really super giving me personally like the Kirk vibes I was feeling, but this episode, like it was more focused on him. Like I definitely felt it more. I definitely I still don't love him, to be honest, but I definitely like him considerably more now that I've spent more time with him. I just thought it was a really cool episode. I always love a good Star Trek does this all the time, a time travel story. Let's just go back to this time and save on some sets this episode. Really, really good though. I had a really good time.
Sparkz?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a good episode. I like a lot of the stuff. If I'm being very honest, I think a decent chunk of the middle didn't really work for me.
Oh, interesting. Xander?
All in all, I liked it. I think Star Trek does time travel well, pretty much, by and large. So they've got already the right ideation of like, okay, we don't have our tricorders. We have to check all the boxes of what we do and don't have.
We gotta blend in
the characters. They kind of hit the things we must do for a time travel episode boxes. So in that way, it's serviceable. But I really enjoyed all the Kirk Lon stuff, which really to me just felt like the purpose of the episode.
Yes,
like the nougaty center of it. So while I'm a little, I think maybe with you on this a little bit on certain aspects of the episode, it was so good at its core with their character interactions that I'm like, I liked it. It was it was good.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everyone here, actually. I really like this episode. I think it's another great episode of a show that I have fallen head over heels in love with. As you guys have said, it is a time travel episode, which Star Trek has done many. This is the most time travel episode, and I'll get into why, kind of some of the why of that. And I think it gets a little lost in the weeds towards the end, but the emotional core of the episode is incredibly strong. Like Ryan, I am more endeared to Paul Wesley as Kirk thanks to this episode, even though this is yet again another alternate Captain Kirk.
Brilliant. Every season I want one.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, I think it allows Paul Wesley to play a different version of Captain Kirk. And I will say the same thing that I said about the first time I met Paul Wesley's Captain Kirk and Equality and Mercy, which is he is written as the pitch perfect Kirk. Like the people who are writing him, they get it. They understand Kirk very well. What Paul Wesley is giving that dialogue and that description and that script is missing that spark that it's weird to say William Shatner had.
Yeah.
Because people like to say that William Shatner is an overactor, and for much of that original show he is, but he brought something to that character that Paul Wesley, and I think Chris Pine recaptures, but Paul Wesley hasn't quite.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think he can get it, but so far he's not quite there. But yeah, let's get right into it. Let's get further into it. Sparkz, you said that the middle is kind of your issue here.
I like on paper the story beats between La'an and Kirk. I don't believe, and I think both actors are talented, Christina Chong and Paul Wesley. I don't think that this is entirely their fault, but I don't believe the kind of falling for each other thing.
Sure.
That's hinted at, or at least I don't think it's delivered well most of the time. I feel like it was fine when
I'll tell you,
like when it first happens and she steps out of her bedroom, I'm like, if she just wants to like sleep, I kind of wish she had just gone and slept with him.
Yeah.
Like to be honest, like that she is just kind of there to like, hey, we're here, woo woo. But this idea that like when she gets to that bit where she says, or you can come back with me, and I'm like, this doesn't feel natural. This doesn't feel like this belongs. This feels very contrived into the show as this idea, and I don't believe you've developed enough feeling for Kirk to actually mean that or desire that.
Yes.
And it never quite got there for me. I believed that they cared about each other, but I didn't believe that they cared that intensely about each other.
Yes.
And I think that was the thing that was getting me, is like, I buy that you guys care about each other. I just don't buy how deep it seems like it's meant to be.
This feels like the level of romance that it escalates to feels like it should be a 2-part episode if this is what you're trying to accomplish. Because I don't have a problem, because I do agree with you. I like overall, like if I'm just looking at it on paper, like I like the idea of like these people who from different universes, they fall in love and the tragedy and stuff like that. I like that idea, but I do think if you want to convey how much they do seem to care about each other, it is within one episode and it's very fast. And it is, you are supposed to, and for some people you can't just like, it's not a big deal, just throw that over, but like it does happen fairly quickly. And it's not like they're together for weeks. It's also, I kind of have a problem, to be honest with you, with the idea that La'an can only connect with someone who doesn't know her family history. I don't like that implication as an idea. I don't like that that's kind of like the only reason she's willing to even open herself up to having feelings for someone is because they don't know anything about her family name. And that kind of idea doesn't work for me. I don't think that's exclusively it though, but that is one thing. It is like it is like Hitler last name thing.
Here's the thing: contextually, the other sides of the episode opens all about her being closed off to people.
Yeah,
not necessarily because other people aren't willing to connect.
Yeah,
Mbenga is actively trying.
Yeah,
and she's like wall.
Yeah,
she only lowers a wall for Kirk after she knows that in his timeline, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
And I don't love that notion that if there's a point about it where like La'an has to learn that that's not healthy, then okay. But the idea that La'an can only be intimate with people who have absolutely zero association with her last name kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
I have a slightly different read on that.
Sure.
Which might just be how I saw it. So I saw this more as La'an falling for Kirk than Kirk falling for La'an.
Mm-hmm. It is more one-sided.
It's more of a one-sided thing, which is why, to me, it worked better than having them fall for each other.
Yeah.
I like the idea of her opening up and finding, whatever it is she's looking for in him. The way I see it with when she realizes he doesn't know who she is less that it allows her to open herself up to him. But I think that it allows her to look at herself without that viewpoint, which is an arc she's been having.
Yeah.
That it's been addressed several times to her by other people. You are not your forefathers. You are not a monster. You are not this person.
Yeah.
Right.
And she hasn't completely internalized it. So to me, it felt less like he doesn't know who I am. I can open up to him. And it felt more like he doesn't know who I am. It doesn't matter.
It's not as important as I thought it was.
It's not as important as it was to me who I am. And I think that that's kind of capped at the end of the episode as well, or right before she goes back to her time.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, while I might be a little bit more forgiving here than I should be in that interpretation of the arc, it just that it made a little bit more sense to me to feel it that way, and I feel like there's enough in the episode to kind of get that perception of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
I
the
wanna
previous.
What? Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, and the previous episode, right? The recap for this episode ends on what Nira says to La'an, like, you're not your family's augmentations. You're not a monster. You are just a person born with the capacity to be good or bad, no more, no less. And that carries her into this arc of the episode, right?
So I want to respond to what Xander was saying, which is I think that's all there. And certainly on paper, I think a lot of the intent is there. But this is one of the first Strange New Worlds episodes where I think the point, or like the thematic point of the episode, is fumbled. And like, I don't think that they get it all there. I don't think the execution's as good as most of the other episodes of the show. I feel like I get what the idea wanted to be. I don't think it was fully baked. Part of it is, I think Ryan might be right. It's simply not enough time for it to go all the way that it should. And a two-parter would have served it better. I think that's true. Or another take could be that, like, I think there's just a little bit too long of them fighting with each other before the relationship starts to shift. Or I think that, to me, because I think there's also a read where, like, there's nothing romantic about it except for her stepping out at night, that it could just be like caring friendship. I think, like, double down on whichever direction you're going.
Yeah.
Is it romantic intention or is it friendship intention? And honestly, I think if she just, like, connects with him because, again, she's willing to just open up because that's like a disconnect from her history, that's fine. It just never got to, again, that point where I was convinced that La'an felt that strongly in delivery and performance, I guess, with no shade on Christina Chong, because I think she's excellent. She's one of my favorite parts of the show, but something didn't work for me here in making me buy the speed with which this relationship was moving forward.
No, and I'll totally agree with that. I do have to read into it a little bit to be able to get what I got from it.
Yeah.
And that means that there wasn't enough to just be presented.
And to cap off on what you were saying, like the last moment, I love, which is the bit where she's challenging them and she's saying, Khan was, monstrous, was
and I'm not
a genocidist, and he's my history. Like, he made all these things and he made me.
Yeah.
And like acknowledging that, but having the ownership of it. But I don't feel like her trajectory in the episode led to that moment as well as it should have.
Right, that's right.
Because, again, we're kind of talking about her connecting with someone who has no association with her name. And then at the end of the episode, it's saying, I'm taking full power of my name. And I'm like, these things don't totally mix together thematically to drive that point home quite the way I think they intended, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see that. I feel you.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think this episode is a little... If it wasn't for Christina Chong and Paul Wesley having, I think, pretty good chemistry and delivering really good performances, especially from Christina Chong, who I think is delivering a series best from her, this episode wouldn't be as strong. She is definitely carrying a lot of this episode, and I don't mean that as any sort of negative criticism. I think it's just a testament to how good she is in this episode.
Yeah,
and I will admit that it was that which made me really like the episode and completely forget in the last week how much I hated the villain.
Oh, Sarah.
Who's the villain?
The Romulan.
The Romulan.
Yeah, the Romulan.
The Romulan who's doing the photographs, fakes out being their friend and protecting them.
I already forgot.
Yeah.
That's the
worst part of that episode.
Yeah, that's like, this is generic. Yeah, here we are. Okay.
So before we get to Sarah, because I have a lot to talk about. I have a lot to talk about that. Paul Wesley, and Kirk and La'an seem to be fated to each other, and there is a kind of a subtextual theme in Star Trek that the timeline wants to correct itself. Characters need to be in a certain place at all times, and that's the explanation for the Kelvin timeline happening the way it does.
they imply that they've tried to get at Khan a lot of times. The
Right,
Romulans have.
and so that's made explicit text in this episode, which I actually kind of appreciate, and I've got again so much to say. But if we remember in Equality and Mercy, La'an is Kirk's first officer on the Farragut.
Mhm.
So I wonder what it is about the timeline. Keep trying to put La'an and Kirk together, and I wonder if that's ever going to be explored in any sort of way.
I wonder if it's maybe not even Elon specifically. Maybe it's a Noonien Singh thing, because like that entire family is like wrapped up in the Kirk shit forever. It feels like.
Oh, maybe, yeah, you're right. Maybe it's a
we
Noonien
have
thing.
10 years in the future where he's going to meet her great great grandfather or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
La'an's not in the rest of Star Trek, right? She's a new character for the show.
Yes.
Okay. I have this fear, honestly, that kind of came up because of this episode, that La'an's final trajectory, like when the show's coming to its end, is that she's going to do something sacrificial that saves Kirk, and he's never going to hear about it.
Oh.
Because I think, unfortunately, like kind of what you're saying, like I just don't see a world where this kind of stuff is happening, and when Khan comes up, La'an's not involved.
Yes.
So that's part of what I feel like is going on, is that La'an's going to have a lot of care for Kirk developed through some kind of, like, this is a building bridge to that, even if it's transitional from something else, and that's going to lead to her doing something for him that is going to take her out of the story.
She is one of like the only characters who is like, you probably can't be around in the future, because I feel like we would know you were there.
Right. I mean, Spock and Uhura are on the Enterprise when they meet Khan, and it's a little difficult to kind of have to be like, well, why didn't they call La'an? And be like, yo, your ancestor is here.
Right, because La'an would be involved.
Absolutely.
And like there's too many people who carry over to that time period that know her now. So yeah, it's kind of like a hair on the back of my neck thing, where I'm sensing like we're building something that's kind of going to be part of La'an's exit from the story.
I sure hope it's one of those things where like they don't feel like they have to kill her off, even in like a heroic way. They could just be like, just go live off in the universe somewhere, and she lived happily ever after. Like she doesn't even have to be part of Star Trek. Just she gets to live on a farm. Like you don't have to kill her.
I don't think there can be anything that it's not necessarily wrong to do that if it's executed properly, but I do wonder if that's part of what they're doing here.
La'an, time cop.
Hey,
the TVA shows up. All right, I keep forgetting things happen.
I want to wait on that. I've got a whole like lecture for you guys.
I did kind of want to because when Xander was bringing up the villain and everything, the Romulan, it did make me kind of click back in that pretty much everything from the moment that they're about to be arrested through that entire like diner scene and everything was the most checked out I was on the episode.
Yeah.
Like I don't even think they needed to do that. I think the Romulan could have been the photographer from the beginning, and you could have just looped it all back that way, and we didn't need the intermediary scene, and just had that stuff be about them.
Yeah.
And have them find another way to get that information that they needed, the important part, but give La'an and Kirk, more time to actually be connecting, because that just sucked a lot of air out of the room, I felt.
No, I did. I kind of agree with that. The last time I watched it, I kind of felt the same way. There's a couple of Easter eggs that I'd be remiss to mention. One is she has a... actually, there's a lot of Easter eggs in that, but I don't know one of them. One of them specifically is a launch platform for a space shuttle. That's from the episode Assignment Earth from the original series. The square... the red square that it points to, that's Kirk and Spock, which is kind of a cute little thing. And then the Romulan ship that shows up was kind of when I kind of checked back into the scene, would be like, what the hell are the Romulans doing here? And Kirk has that moment. I do really appreciate that La'an, because I forgot this, that La'an didn't immediately recognize the Romulan ship, because at this point, Starfleet hadn't seen the Romulans in 100 years, at La'an's point anyway. But Kirk's been at war with them for a very long time.
Sure.
Supposedly since the 21st century is what this episode kind of makes it look
Space
like.
fleet.
Right.
So I do really like that kind of bit of, even Sarah, like she's disguised. So technically La'an has no reason to think that a Romulan looks like a Vulcan at this point.
She gets used to her ears after a while.
Yeah. I also like that it's Sam that brings Kirk to realize, oh, my timeline should die.
No, I thought that was a really good beat.
Yeah. Because I like the idea that Sam, I do like what they've done with Sam in this show, and I hope I'm sure we'll see him more in the season. And when they're talking about, like, I may not exist in your timeline, and she's like, you do. I've heard stories from your brother Sam, and he's like, oh, okay, now I get the deal here.
Yeah.
I like that beat a lot.
Yeah. No, it's a good one.
I did mention that I like how they write Kirk, because I do. When he was playing chess, I don't know what it is about Paul Wesley's performance as Kirk, but like they are writing an incredible Kirk, because he is a master tactician. He is the only one to beat Spock at chess. And that's the first episode we meet Kirk. He beats Spock at 3-dimensional chess. And so we have this whole montage of him beating so many people at 2-dimensional chess, which he calls idiot's chess. And I'm like, this is perfect. This is great that they remember that Kirk isn't some playboy. He's actually incredibly intelligent.
Well, I mean, he's kind of both.
Well, because also he's like New York City. It's like, this is Toronto.
Yes, that's a fun bit. I'm glad they filmed in they actually filmed in Toronto, which is not, you can tell, like it feels like they've filmed on location. And Kirk has this like Chris Pine has gotten a lot of flack for being like the Kirk that the fan base thinks Kirk is, which is this person who'll sleep with anything that moves. That's not the Kirk from the original series. In fact, he falls in love more than anything. He's just quick to fall in love a lot in the original series. And but he's also a master tactician. And to get this kind of version of Kirk is really nice, because it means that the writers actually really care about developing a proper Captain Kirk, or at least at this point, a Lieutenant Kirk.
For sure.
Because we do the first appearance of Prime Kirk in this episode also.
Oh yeah, she calls him like, hey, this isn't weird at all. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Brandon, you read Jonathan Hickman, the X-Men, and Jerry Dugan's X-Men. Mm-hmm. There's that vault mini arc where X-23 and Seek go into the vault and they fall in love, and then only one of them remembers it. And I'm like, this is some X-Men shit right here.
Yeah.
But it's not the original time that's happened before, but I'm like, no, that's definitely
with absolutely not zero, but very little to base this on for Kirk performances, right? Mm-hmm. I think Paul Wesley does a really good job of differentiating with subtle things he does between Kirk from the alternate timeline and Kirk Prime. Mm-hmm. There's a different energy when he enters the screen as Kirk Prime. Yeah. And you can tell. And I think that's really nice that that's what makes me think Paul Wesley is the right person for the job, even if he's not maybe capturing the Shatner id. Yeah. He's working as Kirk to me. Because I think when he shows up as Prime, it's like you have this versatility, you have this energy for Kirk. It's very clear even from this small scene.
Yeah.
How much money did he win though to get that hotel room?
Probably a couple hundred.
Enough.
Yeah.
Canada's a lot better about it than the States.
And drive across country lines, bribing a border guard, taking. It won a lot of money. I thought that was.
It's funny. Okay. They're white or white passing. Yeah, so like
it's true.
And it's Canada, so it's like 50% nicer up there.
Pelia makes an appearance in this episode. I quite like Carol Kane.
Look, I honestly, I wish I could say it's a 10 out of 10 because of Carol Kane alone, but I can't.
It's true.
But like, Carol Kane's great. I'll always watch her in the show.
That she also still exists in this universe and is nice and lovely. I love that. Mm-hmm. She's a universal constant.
I'm glad that she wasn't an engineer yet because that would have felt convenient, but I am also glad that they at least gave her something present to do there that aided them in some way, rather than just being like, oh, this was just, it's always nice to see Carol Kane.
I love this this quote. Kirk's like, you're not an engineer? And she's like, I work retail. Does this look like an engineer's engineering place? I've been taking math since Pythagoras made that shit up. That's pretty good. She said crab. I made it funnier.
There's a bit when she's on the Enterprise because she's got a bunch of stolen card. I mean, it's stolen from hundreds of years ago. So like she's right. The statute of limitations are over. I do love the idea that there is somebody at the Louvre whose job it is to like maybe like every 50 to 100 years call her and be like, hey, can we have our painting back?
Yeah.
I do really like that little headcanon.
So we get the time cop lady.
Yes.
Don't ever talk about this with anyone. And I'm sitting here like, did she have to go say that to Carol Kane too?
She probably, honestly, Pelia probably forgot.
Maybe.
She seems like someone who's like, I'm not going to talk about it.
That's possible. I don't know. I feel like she would remember the first person on Earth who knew she was an alien.
Yeah.
That she encountered.
Right. No, but we assume she's the first that knows, but
I mean, knew without her saying. Like without her telling them. Someone comes to you and says, I know you're an alien.
Yeah.
You kind of remember that. Nobody else would have known before that. There's no reason for anyone else to have known without her saying, I am this.
Yeah, that's fair.
She says it's like
I think you remember
century.
that person, especially when they're like, I know, and I can't tell you why I know. That shit'll eat at you.
Yeah, I was waiting literally at the end of the episode for her to walk into Long's quarters and kind of like say something or have like some quip that's like, I know or I remember, and leave it at that.
Owen Wilson shows up.
Yeah, so
even on the level where like she'll never actually say anything about it out loud, but there's like a little wink to her now because Carol Kane's good at that.
Right. And I mean like if we don't get it, if we didn't get it that episode, I doubt we'll get it at any other point.
You never know.
But again, you never know.
Yeah.
And a part of me is like, yeah, it would have been nice to have. Another part of me feels like we were kind of setting up the end of an emotional arc, and that might have thrown off a little bit.
For sure. My greater point being like, just a
right.
fun conversation.
Did the time cop have to go say something?
Interfere Carol Kane, because Carol Kane should, in theory, potentially remember.
There's history of long-lived species in Star Trek just not divulging that they've met the person, that they've met somebody in the past who they won't meet for like hundreds of years. Guinan met Picard in the 1800s and didn't say it for 5 seasons before that moment actually happened. So Pelia could just know the deal at this point.
Yeah, she seems like she's like, I'm no problem. I turned my head the other way. Don't worry.
I love the line when she's like, engineering, maybe I missed my calling. It'd be nice to have an honest living. Not that any of this is stolen.
Yeah. Never changed for 1,000 years.
Every line she delivers is just the best line of that episode.
Her silly little accent, just wonderful. Just wonderful.
Yes, well, that's a fake, isn't it? So, yeah, I really like Carol Kane. I'm glad she's here, and as Sparkz said, it's really nice that she wasn't wasted. She does help the crew get the thing, and it's so interesting watching that scene because La'an. You know, Sparkz is right, and I think we all made the same observation. Once La'an realizes that Kirk doesn't know who Khan Noonien Singh is, La'an is very different in that scene specifically. She's much more bantery with Kirk, which leads more to the kind of romance moment. And I kind of really like seeing Christina Chong play that role because she's such a hard ass so much of the time. It reminds me of when she and Una did the Enterprise bingo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite moments in the show.
Same.
There's a fun joke here where Kirk says, "I was born on the USS Iowa." This is cute because Kirk was born in Iowa.
Sure. I honestly, like, it was in the trailer, but the bit plays where haven't seen a revolving door. I'm from space.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's pretty good. There's another bit that I want to bring up, which is so they mentioned that Sam is actually his middle name. His real name is George Samuel Kirk, and then Tiberius is his grandfather's name. Those are both from the Kelvin films. Those are both created by Star Trek 09. And in fact, so the reason why I bring it up is because, fun fact, the Star Trek 09 bit. So if you remember the beginning of Star Trek 09, which how many people do, honestly, when Kirk is driving the car, he yells to someone. Yells, "Hey, George."
Uh-huh.
And that was retconned later to be Kirk's brother. So they had to be like, actually, George is his first name.
That's cute.
So that was just a complete mistake to be like, because there's a deleted scene that explains that that's his brother leaving.
Look, if George was my first name, I'd go with Sam as my middle name as my regular name too.
So I just thought that was a fun little bit.
Grandpa's name was George.
Sorry.
Is he curious?
There's a pretty solid chase scene where they chase through the streets of Toronto in a red Charger, I think.
I don't remember, but that was fun.
Yeah,
and then it ended.
Then it ended.
It was all right. It was cool.
It
was a chase.
It happened.
So
he went from not knowing how to drive a car to knowing how to drive a car pretty good.
Yeah, so I was just like, nah, this is whatever.
So that's where I think that's kind of what I want to get at, which is this episode, by the end of it, kind of fumbles a bit. One of the reasons why is because I think it completely forgets what the plot is. And I say that because I left myself wondering, okay, so this Romulan is from some point in the future. She's here to kill Khan or blow up Toronto or both. Probably both.
It's both.
And she is, but she's not the only Romulan here. There have been Romulan agents on Earth for decades who are slowing down human progress. And I actively dislike that.
Secret invasion.
Because I don't like the idea that there have been external forces killing JFK or blowing up labs or doing 9/11, things like that. Like that's just that kind of falls in the same line of like, oh, aliens made the pyramids. Yeah. It's not a plot device I like, and I'm kind of sad that Star Trek incorporated that because they never did before. This is new for Star Trek.
I think it's very hard when you have the ability to do things like what Star Trek's doing, which is, place things further back in the timeline and not want to tie it to major historical landmarks. I think that's just like not when it started happening, but obviously now it's kind of a trap that writers fall into where it's like, oh, and we can associate this to this and this to this.
I mean, that's Doctor Who.
And you could just like piece out everything. But like with Doctor Who, that's baked into the beginning.
Yeah.
And to Brandon's point with Star Trek, it wasn't.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's Doctor Who. Like, I don't need Star Trek to
yes,
do that.
It's a Doctor Who thing, and and then other properties have done that, as he alluded. Like, aliens responsible for the pyramids being a bit for a long time. Like, you're right, and like it just feels like low hanging fruit. It's low hanging fruit.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I would like, because like the bomb, the bridge was always supposed to be destroyed by future Romulans or current day Romulans. I'm never quite sure if the Romulans that destroy the bridge are from the future or from the modern day. And that and if they're from modern day, why are they on Earth anyway? And if they're from the future, like why are they messing? Why are they doing more? Why? And like that's what Sarah is there to be like, you're not doing enough. I'm going to do something really bold. And I was like, I don't need this. You're complicating this too much.
Yeah, I agree.
Why did they destroy the bridge?
That's a really good question. To slow human progress is what Sarah said.
That bridge was really important to human progress,
it's
friends.
True, every word.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be like...
Because it feels more like, in context of the episode, like it's just giving away your position for the mission to kill Khan.
I know we talked about, because I'm just looking at the synopsis. We talked about the TVA agent, but we forgot that the mission starts by a random dude giving her this thing that teleports her to another dimension.
Yeah.
Okay. I just forgot about that. I was like, that's interesting. Here you go.
So this is a larger conversation that I want to have, which is that dude is either from the 29th or 30th century. We've seen this.
Sorry, go ahead.
We've seen this Starfleet before. Starfleet in the 29th century has utilized time travel to protect the timeline. By the 30th century, they're in a temporal Cold War, and by the 31st century, they're in an all-out war. All of it to deal with time travel. Time travel by Starfleet is not new, even in the 23rd century. But by the 27th century, it's weaponized. You don't need to understand any of this. I'm just trying to get to a point, which is that I kind of like the idea. This is actually something I like, which is that this dude who shows up is from Starfleet in the far, far future, trying to protect the timeline, namely stop Khan from being killed. And even the device he gives her is from Voyager. The screen that shows up is from Star Trek Voyager, which is when we were first introduced to these time travel people. There is something called the Temporal Prime Directive in Star Trek, which is introduced in Deep Space Nine, which is basically you need to protect the timeline at all costs, and you can't deviate it at all. Kirk got in a lot of trouble because he deviated a lot. Even though they didn't exist back then, they kind of retroactively just blame Kirk for a lot of shit.
The Prime timeline.
So, like the Temporal Prime Directive, like the Prime Directive, which we talked about last week, which is like, don't interfere with a pre-warp species development and evolution. It's the same thing with the Temporal Prime Directive. Don't interfere with the past in any way that corrupts the timeline. And so the Romulan, so there's a lot of callbacks to this. What am I trying to get at? Which is that there's a lot of callbacks to Star Trek Enterprise, Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Deep Space Nine in this episode in regards to time travel, specifically the temporal Cold War, which is actively mentioned by Sarah. Whole temporal wars have been fought over this moment in time, and this moment keeps being placed. It was supposed to be in the 90s, but now it's here, and I've been waiting 30 years for this. I'm not a fan of trying to make Star Trek our future, which is something I've talked about a lot in these shows, specifically Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard. This is the plot of Star Trek Picard Season 2, by the way. This whole episode is 45 minutes, and it's the entire season of Picard Season 2. So you've seen the whole season. Good job.
Single Borg Queen. I feel cheated.
That's fair. You got me. The Borg Queen is in Season 2. And Hershing, rest in peace. So the idea of using the temporal Cold War to move the eugenics wars up isn't inherently a bad idea, and I get the reason, which is to keep making Star Trek an aspirational future. However, because Star Trek is such a long franchise, I think it's actually really important to consider it an alt history franchise and not our future, which is why moving the eugenics wars from the 90s to the mid 21st century bugs me a little bit. I get the decision. I'm not inherently mad at the decision. I just don't think, and I kind of like the way you do it, but I just don't think you needed to do it. You get what I'm saying?
No, I understand. To me, it just sounds like the Marvel DC sliding timescale. Like you can't have Iron Man appear in the 60s, so it has to be during the 90s instead of the 60s. Like I think they're just like, that doesn't necessarily mean like,
but
things will. I see what you're saying, but I think they just want to move it to a more modern setting so they can tell that story without referencing the older stuff. But like, I can see why it could be an issue.
And I think to Brandon's point, like, if you're making, especially a show like Strange New Worlds, which takes place before the original series, is supposed to have deep ties to it and canon connection and everything. Yeah. It is meant to be belonging to that show's history. Mm-hmm. It does feel a little like, look, whatever happened there is cemented. It can be malleable up to a point, but otherwise, like, once you start hitting things where like old Star Trek said this happened in the year 2032.
Yeah.
Well, then it happened in the year 2032. And that is the timeline. And just because we hit 2032 and our lives don't match up, that's never going to happen. Like, no show's ever going to perfectly predict what the future is going to be.
Yeah.
And I do think like Star Trek can remain an aspirational idea without it having to feel like we will absolutely move into this future.
Right.
And I agree with your point that you're making, like that it should just hold to its bars and say like, when we start crossing those periods where it's said that something has happened here, you leave it be.
Yeah.
As alt history.
Right. So for a really good example of what Sparkz is just talking about is actually Picard Season 2 and Deep Space Nine, which has a time travel episode where they go to the year 2024. That's next year. in 2024, California is a shit show. The entire United States is crumbling. Oh shit.
Well,
I was gonna say, I don't know if they need to change anything there. It seems pretty accurate.
But specifically, there's something called the Bell Riots, which happened because of sanctuary cities. Look, yes, our world, not great. You got to get to the shit before you can get to the great, which is what this episode is about. But it's probably unlikely that next year we're going to see anything like those sanctuary cities, specifically the Bell Riots. So, like, are you going to move that also? And you shouldn't, right? I don't think you should, because you said that's what happens in Star Trek's history. Star Trek's history is not our history.
Mhm.
The franchise is so long, and Ryan makes a good point, because there's a sliding scale in comics, but those characters don't age.
Yeah.
Those characters are meant to stay 30-ish forever.
Well, that like, even though the Marvel cycle doesn't reset the way DC does, like in a way, in your mind at a certain juncture, like it feels like it resets, even if it doesn't do a real reset.
So,
right. And Star Trek doesn't do that. It doesn't have like a re-up, unless you're counting the Kelvin timeline, which is its own bag of worms.
So
go ahead.
I slightly disagree here.
Yeah.
And I disagree because on one hand you do, but you don't. It's let me try to word this.
Word it.
Just taking the Deep Space Nine thing, sanctuary cities and all that.
Yeah.
We're hitting a time when it came out where immigration was just as much an issue as it is right now. And where it was topical enough to have an episode where you could see a future in which the bad outcome is this. You can still see that now as that being the bad outcome. Now, could they make another event that would reflect kind of like a current thing happening now and its possible future, good or bad? Yeah, but we already have an event that reflects that in a way. So to me, sliding that up with whatever in-world reason to still be able to relate to current topics, which is what Star Trek has always done, to me, I'm okay with it, because it's less about, we have to hit these points in time. We're not hitting them, move it up, and more, these subjects are still as important as they were before, and they want to be able to introduce them in story and not create a whole new thing to put that story in.
Just to your point, can't we just tell the story even if we've passed the date of the thing and say the thing is there, and still be expanding on it as reflective of the story that thematically you're trying to tell?
Right.
Without sliding it to match modern day.
And that's what I mean by, like, I agree and disagree, because yes, you could do that.
Yeah.
But I also feel I'm never the type to, like, underestimate your audience. But there is a lowest common denominator that sometimes people try to hit by saying, hey, if we put this in the future, people will more easily relate to this is something that could happen.
I hear you.
Right. And I don't, it's a hard stance to have, because it's like, I know what you mean. It makes sense. And it's more of I myself am trying to, like, find the reasoning for why this could be okay. And a little bit of just kind of I want a counter argument here.
Yeah. Well, and I think, just real quick, Brandon, I think some things can be malleable and slide around, especially smaller things, because you don't expect whoever's writing the show to have absolute perfect concrete knowledge of every single event that has occurred in Star Trek and how to reference it in the timeline properly and everything. That's insane. That being said, I think when you're talking about something that's the eugenics wars, which is referenced so heavily, even I'd heard of it before I started watching Strange New Worlds. I think that probably should stay where it is, because that feels like that's like talking about a world war kind of thing. That's talking about, like, this happened to a specific moment in time that Star Trek decided to cement. It shouldn't probably be messed with. It's something more consistent across a bunch of shows.
That's fair. And if Star Trek were to ever move World War II to the 60s, I would be like, okay, that's fine. You can move everything.
Yeah.
But being that they never have,
Yeah.
Yeah, I can concede
Because
that
even though
point.
it's not our history, it is still history. You don't
'Cause
change history.
It's different than referencing like one episode referenced this event that happened in
Right,
this
yeah.
year, this time. Oh, we kind of retconned that. We kind of changed it, right? Or, like that was just 30 years apart in the TV
Yeah.
writing. Sure. Okay. Canon's not going to be perfect in that way. The eugenics wars is like a point that they talk about across the board. It probably should stay, and other points like that should stay.
Yeah, again, like it's not a make it or break it thing for me. It's just kind of a thing. And I agree with what Sparkz is saying. First contact, for example, is April 6th, 2063. We
Right.
know that. That's a set
should not
date in
change.
Star Trek. What'd you say?
Right, and it shouldn't change.
Right. And so when we get to 2063, maybe there's a Star Trek show on. Who knows? But that Star Trek show probably shouldn't change that date and just be like, yeah, okay, you know what? That's what
Or
happened.
like,
Whatever.
honestly, in the long run of IP, either Star Trek is completely refreshed and rebooted, or more likely they just keep expanding on what Star Trek is.
Yeah.
And if they're at that point, whenever that point is, past 2063 or whatever, and you know for sure they put out something that year, some kind of Star Trek thing comes out, we're gonna see it. You hold to those rules and you hold to what comes after that, and that's not going to reflect our real world.
Now, all that nitpicking said, I stand by everything said here. I do actually kind of like using the temporal Cold War to move the event, because it means it kind of creates the idea of this is an event that has to happen in the timeline, and so the timeline is fighting back to keep this event happening, no matter where it is, no matter where
It's Terminator. It's Terminator with Skynet. Skynet will always happen.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's Terminator, and I do really enjoy that, because this kind of operates as a sequel to Star Trek Enterprise in that way, which never really resolved the temporal Cold War plotline they were doing for the entire run. And it kind of implies that the Romulans were involved in that in the 30th century. And so that could be where Sarah is from, right? Like Sarah could be from the 30th century. We never really get a concrete year from where she's from.
Wherever she is, she's heard of Kirk and she hates him.
Yeah, it does say just on the Wikipedia that she is a time traveler from the future. That's all. That's all we get. Yeah.
So there's a lot of that, and I do. Look, I would love to revisit the temporal Cold War, because and I really like the idea that of Starfleet as temporal agents trying to not just protect the timeline, but like monitoring it and being like, okay, this event has been changed. We need to go back and fix that. Like, I like that idea in Star Trek, and I'm glad to see that kind of pop up again, because when Discovery moved to even further than that, they were like, yeah, time travel's outlawed. We're not messing with it.
We stuck.
I do feel like you can still enter the same space of conversation we were having just about like laws in terms of augmentation, about laws in terms of time. Who decides what is the correct event?
The Time Lords.
And when? Starfleet? That's not perfect judgment.
That's why the Cold War starts, because there was something called the Temporal Accords that happened that said time travel must not be used to alter the timeline. It must only be used to study the timeline. And so the Temporal Cold War happened because there's a couple of different factions like, no, F that. We're going to go there. We're going to go to the past and change things for the better or for the worse. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you're evil, you try it for the worst. If you're good, you try for the best. And so Starfleet is the kind of alliance to be like, we'll go back into the past and make sure that the events don't change.
Sure.
So in that way, it's more like whatever the timeline is when those temporal accords are written needs to be preserved. It cannot change.
I think this is still a situation where we talked about like last week or the week before, where like, even though like it is a universe thing, like Starfleet is like the
right,
people,
yeah.
There's the humans are. Yeah.
Well, I also think there's a chicken or the egg thing, because like, how do they know like when they made the temporal accords that the timeline was perfect as was? Yeah. They're just deciding that that it hadn't been altered.
They went back in time to make sure the accords are perfect.
yeah.
Star Trek Enterprise, good show, by the way. I'll defend it to the day I die. Season 3 and 4 are really great. I'm just saying, they're like top-notch seasons. Kirk dies in this episode.
Yes.
Hashtag not my Kirk.
A Kirk.
A Kirk.
A Kirk dies.
I really like that I really like his death line, "Say hi to Sam" for me.
Mhm.
I like the kind of play on the idea that like, oh, you're not going to shoot me because of all these things that are going to happen. And then she does. It's a really good moment. I think it works.
Absolutely.
This is the first time that Khan's been cast the right ethnicity.
Baby Khan.
We did it.
Hell yeah.
We did it, guys. He's not Spanish and he's not white.
Yeah, I don't know, like, I haven't thought about it since I saw it in the moment, which we'll talk about now, but like, just upon seeing that, like, I'm just a big fan of like, because again, like, there's Uncanny X-Force, which is like my favorite X-Men comic, and that's about X-Force going to kill baby Apocalypse, because like, if Hitler is a baby, do you want to take him out early? Is like, that's a moral choice you got to make. And that is a hard one to make, especially with children. And like the fact that Star Trek is a show that will be like, yeah, like these people are here to kill a child. The worst person who ever existed, yes, but he's not that person yet. And that is juicy shit. And again, on seeing him, like seeing the person that he isn't, that he will become, who makes her and all that stuff we talked about earlier, it's like really cool. Again, I don't know if it's supposed to, like, if it works for the story or anything, but I just think it works on an emotional level.
Yeah. I had suspected last season that some way I kind of felt like La'an needed to confront Khan, but I couldn't really think of a way outside of time travel to do it. And I thought at bare minimum that we'd see her meet adult Khan during the Eugenics Wars.
Yeah.
But I thought this was actually a really interesting way to do it, to have her come to terms with this child version of Khan, and that's how she kind of comes to terms with what his legacy is, being her. She is a better person. You know, it's kind of like represents Starfleet. Like Starfleet went through the darkness of the Eugenics Wars, Civil War II, and World War III, and then we had First Contact, and then
they went into darkness, one could say.
And then we had this beautifully, and then we created this beautiful utopia. And so like for La'an it's kind of like seeing a similar trajectory. Yes, Khan was a horrible genocidal mass murdering psychopath, but I'm not that. Mm-hmm. He is my legacy, but I am not my legacy. I am beyond that. We just both quoted 2 Star Trek sequels, Into Darkness and Beyond.
Yeah.
I am beyond that, and I like her coming to terms with that. So that was cute.
And it is one of those things too, where like, you know, this kid, like in this alternate universe, who knows what could happen, but you know Khan's destiny, right? Yeah. It is one of those things like, maybe this kid, you have context, you nerd, you know, like maybe this could be a different Khan, like maybe, but like probably not. But it's just like, you see him as a child, and you're like, there could be a future for this kid, but like his name's Khan, so like we know it sucks. There's a fun little Easter egg in this episode that I want to mention, which is that Khan is playing chess. Idiot's chess, as Kirk calls it. Fun fact, Kirk is, as I mentioned before, really good at three-dimensional chess. When the reason why he beats Khan in The Wrath of Khan is because Khan only thinks 2-dimensionally, whereas Kirk thinks 3-dimensionally. That's a line from the movie. And I think that because, like, you know, space, you can go up and down, not just side to side or forward and back. And Khan doesn't realize that because he's not thinking like that. He's thinking 2-dimensionally. I can only move on this one plane. And that's how Kirk beats him, by realizing, oh, I can do this. I can do this and come up. He learned that he can go up. And so like it's kind of a fun little. It's probably not intentional because you're probably just doing it because you wanted to give the sense that this kid is really smart, but it does kind of accidentally create a nice little callback to The Wrath of Khan. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
I think Christina Chong really sells me on the call with Kirk at the end. The way she's holding it together till the second that he's off the line and then falls apart. Yes, is incredible. It really makes me want to believe more of the stuff that happened earlier in the episode because it's so good. Yeah. But I'm like, I just don't buy everything that came before. Not every bit of it, but I do buy this. Yeah.
It's such an emotional crux of just like that entire not just episode, but like her own personal arc and everything that interaction meant. And then not just that, but she breaks down, and it's about Kirk primarily, but also she met Khan. She has this whole like parallel universe time travel thing going on. And it was just so great to like the way that she just so quietly breaks down about it is so in character as well.
Mm-hmm.
It just, oh man, I legit started like tearing up with her.
Mhm.
And while that does say something about the story they were able to tell, I think it says a lot more about her as an actor.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Killed it.
Oh, so good.
And I think to kind of echo something Ryan said when we talked last week about Una and how that episode affected her and what we want to see going forward, to feel better about some of the things I brought up in the episode, like her not being able to open up unless she's with someone who's never heard of the name Noonien Singh before. I need her to be changed by this going forward.
Yes.
I need that to be a part of it. I need to see them do La'an opening up the next time Benga asks her to.
Yeah, a little more friendly. Yeah.
And Benga has a great line where it's, as your doctor, I think you should see someone. I don't want a doctor, I want a sparring partner. Well, as a sparring partner, I think you should talk to your doctor.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Oh, that was cute.
And Benga's great. This whole cast.
Yeah.
Whole cast is great. Love it.
I think there's a boldness to this episode that I really appreciate just in general, because you decided to center your third episode of your second season on only one of your cast members. There's no one else here as a main character, even a side character. They're all essentially cameos at the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
And you center
Carol
it on
Kane.
one Carol Kane. You center it on one episode. You center it on one of your main cast members. And an alternate version of a legacy character, and you change established Star Trek canon. You use time travel. You use concepts from different shows, and you kind of blend it all together. And you try to, and you hope that it works. And I think for the most part it does. And I really appreciate that they were willing to not play it safe, because however you think this episode worked or not, I don't think it's a safe episode.
I agree with that.
Yeah, just the fact that they're trying something is really nice to see.
Yeah.
I just think they tripped more than they usually have, which is
Sure.
just surprising for this show.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. Well, I got no more notes. If you guys want to be done with this.
That'll do her.
Ready to trek.
Ready to watch the next one.
Yeah,
Right
couple of hours from the time we're recording this.
True that.
Okay, well that's that. That's tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Join us again tomorrow. No, I'm kidding. Star Trek Strange New Worlds season 2 continues on, and we will continue to talk about it with next week's episode. So stay tuned for that discussion. Of course, if you like Star Trek, there's plenty more Star Trek shows over on Fake Nerds Watch that you can check out, as well as I've started Fake Nerd Book Club up again with my good friend Travis Alexander from Kaiju Ramen, where we talked about Star Trek Discovery Aftermath, which is a comic book prequel to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is why I did it. So stay tuned for the next episode of that one. But of course, guys, Fake Nerds Watch has other shows. There is an episode of Secret Invasion. Stay tuned for when we return to Secret Invasion at a to-be-determined date. We will. Just depends on when. And of course, you can check out all sorts of other shows, guys. There's plenty of other shows. If you like this video, you subscribe to this channel, you can check out all sorts of other shows, such as Basement Arcade, which is our video game Let's Play series. 2 episodes of Basement Arcade are up now, featuring Ryan and Sparkz playing through some video game demos on Steam. Yes?
That's true.
Basement Arcade Pause Menu, which is our video game discussion series. I already mentioned Victor Book Club, but there's also Animation Station. Miscellaneous, which is going through some Indiana Jones stuff if you're interested in Indiana Jones. There's The Real Score, which is our newest show, new episode coming soon. Animation Station, did I say that?
Yes.
You said it.
Cool. Well, Conversation. There's Conversation. I didn't say that one. A new episode of Conversation coming soon. So stay with my good friend Rachel Strange from the Narrative Labyrinth podcast. Stay tuned for her episode that on her podcast where I talk about Star Trek 09, which is a very good episode, and I can't wait for people to hear that. You can find us. You can also find our TeePublic and our Patreon if you'd like to support us financially on that is linked below, or you can find everything on our website at fakenerdpodcast.com. Keep visiting that website if you're inclined. I'm updating it almost daily at this point. I really love working on it, adding new things constantly. So keep going there and refreshing it. There's new stuff. Ben's blog is almost updated completely if you guys are interested in reading Ben's back catalog. And that's it. Fake Nerd Podcast on all the socials if you'd like to get in touch with us. I'm at BT McClure on Instagram and Twitter, where you can also find me writing for CPR.com, AtomicGeekdom.com, and KaijuRamenMedia.com, where I'm also the website editor. Ryan, where can people find you?
You can find me leaving space and going to fantasy with Final Fantasy 16 because I'm enjoying it so much at DJ Tony Snark 616 everywhere.
Sparkz?
You can find me trying to survive with Jedi Survivor at Sparkz Witty on Instagram and Twitter, SPARKZ Witty.
And Xander.
All right, you can find me playing many different games on Twitch and Kick at Jack in the Box.
Very cool. All right, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel. Subscribe if you're listening to the audio on all their podcatchers of choice if you're interested. And until next time you see us, guys, live long and prosper.